In the shadowed corridors of the Soviet Union during the early years of the Cold War, a quiet revolution was underway, one that would challenge the very foundation of the KGB's confidence in its impenetrable codes. The late 1940s and early 1950s were a time when the Soviet state, emerging victorious from the ravages of World War II, sought to cement its global dominance through a network of espionage that spanned continents. At the heart of this vast intelligence web were cryptographic systems designed to protect the Soviet Union's most sensitive communications from prying Western eyes. Among these systems, the Vernam cipher, an advanced encryption technique for its time, stood as a fortress of secrecy. The KGB officers who operated these codes wore their cryptographic prowess as a badge of honor, convinced that their methods were unbreakable. They believed that the Soviet approach to cryptography was inherently superior to anything the West could muster, a belief reinforced by decades of ideological certainty and the successes of their intelligence operations. In their eyes, the codes they crafted were not merely technical tools. They embodied the invincibility of the Soviet state itself. The very idea that these ciphers could be deciphered by outsiders was unthinkable, a notion dismissed with disdain and derision. Within the dimly lit rooms where encrypted messages passed from hand to hand, the Vernam cipher reigned supreme. This cryptographic system, employing a theoretically secure method of combining plain text with a random key to produce ciphertext, promised a level of secrecy that could, in principle, never be broken if used correctly. The KGB's reliance on this cipher was emblematic of their broader strategy to create an aura of mystery and invulnerability around their communications. Every message encoded with the Vernam method was a testament to Soviet ingenuity, a secret that only the most loyal and skilled operatives could hope to unlock. Yet beneath this veneer of confidence, the machinery of the Soviet cryptographic world was not without its flaws. The implementation of the Vernam cipher required meticulous attention to detail, and the generation of truly random keys tasks easier said than done in the constrained environments of Soviet intelligence. Nonetheless, such imperfections remained hidden behind layers of secrecy and bureaucratic inertia, shielded from the scrutiny of outsiders and even many within the intelligence community itself. As the Cold War intensified, the stakes of maintaining secure communications grew ever higher. The Soviet Union's vast network of spies, informants, and diplomats depended on the KGB's ability to send messages that could not be intercepted or decoded by Western intelligence agencies. The very survival of the Soviet state's strategic interests hinged on this cryptographic fortress remaining intact. It was a fortress built on trust, tradition, and the unshakable belief in the superiority of Soviet science. In this atmosphere of secrecy and self-assurance, the KGB officers continued their work with an air of invulnerability. They conducted their operations with a quiet confidence, convinced that their codes would stand the test of time and scrutiny. The notion of an outsider cracking their ciphers was laughable, a fantasy entertained only by the naive or the enemies of the state. The Soviet cryptographic apparatus was a closed system, protected by ideology as much as by mathematics, and it seemed impervious to challenge. Meanwhile, the world beyond the Soviet borders was a place of rapid technological and intellectual advancement, where new ideas about cryptography and code breaking were emerging. In Western capitals, mathematicians and engineers were pushing the boundaries of what was possible with early computers and analytical techniques. These developments threatened to upend the balance of power in intelligence, introducing vulnerabilities into systems once considered unassailable. Yet, within the Soviet Union, such innovations were met with suspicion or outright hostility. The KGB's leadership remained wedded to their established methods and skeptical of any challenges to the status quo. The culture of secrecy and the fear of internal dissent meant that cryptographic practices were rarely subjected to rigorous external review. This insularity, while intended to safeguard the state, sowed the seeds of potential disaster. Unbeknownst to the KGB, the seemingly impregnable fortress of the Vernum cipher was about to face an unexpected challenge, one that would come not from foreign spies or rival intelligence agencies, but from a most unlikely source. In the provinces of the Soviet Union, far from the centers of power and secrecy, a quiet observer was beginning to probe the edges of cryptographic knowledge, setting in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of Soviet intelligence. At this juncture, the KGB officers remained oblivious to the brewing storm. They continued to guard their codes with unwavering faith, convinced that their cryptographic mastery was beyond reproach. The early Cold War era thus stood as a paradox, a time of immense technological promise, shadowed by a dangerous complacency within one of the world's most feared intelligence agencies. The stage was set for a confrontation between the old guard's confidence and the emerging forces of mathematical innovation, a confrontation that would reveal the vulnerabilities lurking beneath the surface of Soviet cryptographic pride. In a modest provincial town, far removed from the imposing Kremlin and the shadowy headquarters of the KGB, an unassuming figure quietly nurtured a fascination that would soon ripple through the highest echelons of Soviet intelligence. This was a math teacher, a man whose days were spent imparting lessons on algebra and geometry to a small classroom of students in a rural school. The humbleness of his surroundings belied the depth of his intellectual curiosity and the profound impact his work would eventually have on the world of cryptography. The teacher's interest in cryptography began as a personal passion, sparked by books and articles that filtered through the limited channels of Soviet academia. Despite the scarcity of resources and the pervasive atmosphere of suspicion toward anything remotely connected to state secrets, he pursued his studies with quiet determination. Late into the night, after the school's lights had dimmed and the village had settled into silence, he would pore over mathematical theories and early decoding techniques, driven by a desire to unlock the hidden patterns that govern secret communications. His experiments were rudimentary at first, relying on pen, paper, and the occasional mechanical calculator salvaged from discarded equipment. Yet, his mind worked with a precision and creativity that transcended his modest tools. He began to explore the Vernum cipher, intrigued by its theoretical perfection and the elegant simplicity of its design. The challenge of cracking such a cipher, widely regarded as unbreakable, became his intellectual quest. Word of his unconventional pursuits eventually reached local intelligence officials, men accustomed to rigid hierarchies and skeptical of civilian involvement in matters of national security. When approached, they regarded his work with a mixture of amusement and disdain. To them, the idea that a provincial schoolteacher could unravel the mysteries of Soviet cryptography was not only improbable, but also potentially subversive. They dismissed his ideas as academic musings, irrelevant to the practical realities of intelligence work. Undeterred by official skepticism, the teacher continued his investigations in relative obscurity. He developed novel approaches that combined mathematical insight with logical reasoning, seeking patterns in the cipher's implementation that might reveal weaknesses. His work was methodical, characterized by patience and an unwavering belief that even the most secure systems could harbor flaws. The provincial school became a secret laboratory where the teacher refined his techniques and tested hypotheses. He devised methods to analyze key reuse and exploited early mechanical limitations inherent in the machines that generated the cipher's keys. His understanding of probability and combinatorics allowed him to identify subtle irregularities that others had overlooked, cracks in the supposedly flawless armor of the Vernam cipher. Despite the isolation, the teacher's work embodied a spirit of innovation that contrasted sharply with the rigid orthodoxy of Soviet intelligence. While the KGB relied heavily on tradition and ideological certainty, he embraced empirical inquiry and mathematical rigor. His efforts represented a quiet rebellion against the complacency that had taken root within the cryptographic community, a challenge born not out of defiance, but out of intellectual curiosity and a commitment to truth. Occasionally, the teacher sought to share his findings with local officials, hoping to spark interest or gain support for further research. These interactions were fraught with tension, as the officials struggled to reconcile the teacher's civilian status with the sensitive nature of his work. Meetings were brief and guarded, with officials wary of exposing state secrets to someone outside the intelligence apparatus, regardless of his mathematical genius. Still, the teacher's persistence wore down some initial resistance. A few lower-ranking officers, intrigued by the novelty of his approach, began to see the potential implications of his discoveries. They recognized that if his methods could expose vulnerabilities in the Vernam cipher, the consequences for Soviet security could be profound. Yet, the entrenched bureaucracy and suspicion of outsiders meant that widespread acceptance remained elusive. In the meantime, the teacher's reputation grew quietly among a small circle of mathematicians and enthusiasts who shared his passion for cryptography. Correspondence with peers, both within and beyond Soviet borders, provided encouragement and occasional collaboration, fueling his resolve. However, the political climate of the time necessitated discretion. Open discussion of cryptographic weaknesses was fraught with risk, as any perceived criticism of state security could invite severe repercussions. Within this constrained environment, the teacher's work advanced steadily. He began to develop a framework for decoding messages encrypted with the Vernam cipher, exploiting patterns created by imperfect key generation and operational errors. These insights were revolutionary, challenging the assumption that the cipher's theoretical security translated seamlessly into practical invulnerability. The juxtaposition between the teacher's analytical breakthroughs and the KGB's dismissive attitude underscored a broader tension within Soviet society, a tension between centralized control and grassroots innovation, between ideological rigidity and scientific exploration. The teacher embodied the latter, a solitary figure pushing the boundaries of knowledge from the margins of the system. As his experiments progressed, the teacher remained acutely aware of the risks he faced. His work, though not explicitly political, touched on matters of national security that were closely guarded by the state. Yet, his conviction in the importance of rigorous inquiry and the pursuit of truth outweighed his fears. He saw himself not as a threat, but as a guardian of Soviet security, seeking to strengthen the state's defenses by exposing hidden weaknesses before adversaries could exploit them. This quiet determination set the stage for an unprecedented confrontation between civilian ingenuity and the might of the Soviet intelligence apparatus. The teacher's growing body of work hinted at vulnerabilities that the KGB had neither anticipated nor prepared for. His methods promised to unravel the codes that shielded Soviet secrets, forcing intelligence officers to confront the reality that their cryptographic fortress might not be as impregnable as they believed. In the provinces, away from the prying eyes of the capital, a modest math teacher was quietly redefining the rules of the game. His fascination with cryptography, nurtured in the classrooms of a small town, was poised to challenge the confidence of a secret police force that had long considered itself invincible. The stage was set for a collision between the unassuming and the powerful, the theoretical and the practical, the civilian and the state, a collision that would reverberate through the hidden world of codes and ciphers in ways no one could yet foresee. The breakthrough came quietly, without fanfare or dramatic revelation, in the dim light of a small study where the math teacher labored over endless sequences of numbers and ciphertext. It was here, amid stacks of notes and scribbled calculations, that he uncovered a flaw so subtle, yet so profound, that it would unravel the very foundation of the KGB's cryptographic confidence. The key to his discovery lay in an imperfection that had long been overlooked: the reuse of cryptographic keys, a fatal flaw in the implementation of the Vernam cipher. The Vernam cipher, in theory, was unbreakable when used properly, relying on a random key that was as long as the message itself and used only once. But in practice, the Soviet encryption machines, constrained by the limitations of early technology and operational expediency, sometimes reused keys or generated keys that were not truly random. The teacher's insight was to recognize that this key reuse created patterns, hidden echoes within the ciphertext that, if identified and exploited, could expose the underlying message. By applying mathematical rigor and logical deduction, the teacher devised novel decoding techniques that leveraged these patterns. He used statistical analysis to detect irregularities in the ciphertext, cross-referencing them with assumptions about the language and structure of the original messages. His approach was both innovative and practical, combining deep theoretical understanding with an empirical methodology previously absent from Soviet cryptographic practice. The process was painstaking. Each message required meticulous deconstruction, with the teacher isolating fragments where key reuse was likely and testing hypotheses about the probable plaintext. Over time, his techniques improved, evolving into a systematic method capable of piercing the veil of secrecy that had long protected Soviet communications. What had been considered an inviolable code was now vulnerable to a civilian's quiet, relentless inquiry. Word of these developments began to filter beyond the teacher's provincial study, reaching ears within the local intelligence community. The implications were staggering. The very codes that safeguarded Soviet secrets, trusted implicitly by KGB officers, had been compromised by a methodical outsider. The initial reaction among intelligence officials was disbelief. How could a school teacher, armed only with mathematics and logic, outwit the vaunted cryptographic machinery of the state? As evidence mounted, however, denial gave way to alarm. The teacher's methods were tested against intercepted messages, and the results were undeniable. portions of encrypted communications, once thought secure, were now being decoded with alarming accuracy. This realization shattered the myth of cryptographic invincibility that had bolstered the KGB's self-image for years. The systemic vulnerabilities exposed by the teachers' work revealed a broader issue. The Soviet cryptographic protocols were not as rigorously enforced or as technically sound as their operators believed. The reuse of keys and mechanical limitations were not isolated errors, but ingrained flaws, consequences of expedient practices and technological constraints. The teachers' decoding techniques did more than crack individual messages. They unveiled structural weaknesses that demanded urgent attention. For the KGB, this was a crisis of confidence. Officers who had prided themselves on their mastery of cryptography now faced the humiliating truth that their codes could be systematically breached. The psychological impact was profound, sowing doubt and fear within the ranks. The idea that a civilian, an untrained outsider, could penetrate their most closely guarded secrets was an affront not only to their professional pride, but to the ideological narrative of Soviet superiority. The teachers' revelations forced a reckoning. Intelligence officials convened secret meetings to assess the scope of the breach and to understand the techniques behind it. These sessions were marked by tension and disbelief as seasoned cryptographers grappled with the reality that their trusted systems had been undermined. The teachers' work, initially dismissed as theoretical curiosity, now demanded serious consideration. Despite the embarrassment, some within the intelligence community recognized the value of the teacher's insights. His methods highlighted the need for more rigorous cryptographic discipline and the dangers of complacency. They underscored the importance of true randomness in key generation and the risks posed by operational shortcuts. In this way, the teacher's breakthrough became a catalyst for introspection and reform within Soviet cryptography. However, the path to reform was fraught with challenges. The entrenched culture of secrecy and hierarchy made it difficult to openly acknowledge weaknesses. Admitting that the KGB's codes had been broken risked undermining morale and exposing vulnerabilities to foreign adversaries. As a result, the teachers' discoveries were often treated with caution, their dissemination tightly controlled. Yet, the evidence was irrefutable. The teacher's decoding techniques had exposed a chink in the armor that no amount of ideological certainty could conceal. His work demonstrated that even the most sophisticated ciphers could fall victim to human error and technical imperfection. It was a stark reminder that cryptographic security depended as much on implementation and vigilance as on theoretical design. The ramifications extended beyond the immediate breach. The teacher's success challenged the KGB's perception of invulnerability and called into question the broader Soviet strategy of relying on secrecy and orthodoxy. It suggested that innovation and critical inquiry qualities, often suppressed in the Soviet system, were essential to maintaining true security. This lesson, painful as it was, would shape the future of Soviet cryptographic practice. In the quiet of his provincial study, the teacher continued to refine his techniques, unaware of the storm his work had unleashed in the corridors of power. His breakthroughs had not only cracked codes, but had also cracked open the rigid walls of Soviet intelligence dogma. The once unassailable Vernam cipher had been laid bare, revealing the vulnerabilities that lay beneath. The KGB officers, once confident and dismissive, now faced a profound humiliation. Their most trusted codes, symbols of state power, and ideological supremacy had been compromised by a civilian whose only weapons were mathematics and perseverance. The psychological blow was as significant as the technical one, shaking the foundations of a secret police force that had long equated cryptographic mastery with political and military strength. As the intelligence services scrambled to respond, implementing emergency measures to patch vulnerabilities and tighten controls, the teacher's work continued to ripple through the Soviet cryptographic landscape. His insights would drive reforms, inspire new approaches, and ultimately transform the way the Soviet Union thought about code security. The era of unquestioned confidence in Soviet cryptography was over, replaced by a cautious recognition of the ever-present battle between code makers and code breakers. The teacher's breakthrough was a testament to the power of intellectual rigor and innovation. In a world dominated by secrecy and suspicion, it was the quiet persistence of a single mind that had pierced the veil of mystery surrounding Soviet codes. This moment marked a turning point, not just in cryptography, but in the ongoing struggle between those who create secrets and those who seek to uncover them. When the unsettling truth finally permeated the walls of the KGB's inner sanctums, the reaction was swift and uncompromising. The initial disbelief that a mere schoolteacher could unravel the fortress of Soviet cryptography gave way to a grim acknowledgement as the evidence became undeniable. Internal investigations were launched, cloaked in secrecy, to trace the extent of the breach and to understand how such a fundamental lapse had gone unnoticed for so long. These investigations were exhaustive and humiliating. Senior cryptographers, once revered as guardians of the Soviet state's secrets, found themselves under intense scrutiny. Their methods and protocols, once considered infallible, were dissected and found wanting. The revelations undermined not only their professional reputations, but also the ideological narrative that Soviet science and security were beyond reproach. The very officers who had boasted of their code's unbreakability now grappled with the bitter reality that their trust had been misplaced. The psychological impact on these officers was profound. Many had dedicated their careers to mastering cryptography, fostering a sense of pride and identity tied to their perceived invincibility. To discover that an outsider, an untrained civilian from a distant province, had outsmarted them was a devastating blow. It challenged their self-esteem, their authority, and the legitimacy of the entire intelligence apparatus they served. The humiliation was compounded by the secrecy surrounding the incident. The KGB's leadership, unwilling to admit vulnerability openly, sought to contain the damage by suppressing information and discrediting the teacher's findings whenever possible. Attempts were made to portray the revelations as anomalies or the result of flawed analysis, efforts aimed at preserving the facade of control and competence. Yet, as the investigations deepened, it became impossible to dismiss the teacher's work outright. The data, the decoded messages, and the reproducibility of his methods forced a reluctant acceptance among the highest ranks. The KGB was confronted with the uncomfortable truth that their cryptographic systems had been fundamentally compromised, not by a foreign adversary, but by one of their own citizens, a civilian, whose intellect and persistence had pierced their veil of secrecy. This admission sparked intense internal debates about responsibility and reform. Some officers sought scapegoats, blaming operational lapses or technological shortcomings, while others argued for a comprehensive overhaul of cryptographic practices. These discussions reflected a broader crisis within the Soviet intelligence community, as it struggled to reconcile its past confidence with the new reality of vulnerability. Beyond the professional sphere, the incident had wider implications for Soviet society and governance. The myth of infallible Soviet science and security was a pillar of state propaganda and public morale. Its erosion, even if confined to secret circles, threatened to weaken the ideological foundations upon which the regime relied. The notion that a simple math teacher could outwit the KGB challenged the narrative of Soviet superiority and fueled anxieties about the state's capacity to defend itself. Despite these pressures, the teacher remained largely a figure of mystery. His work was closely guarded, and official recognition was muted, reflecting the political sensitivities of the time. Open praise could be construed as an admission of failure by the security services, a risk the regime was unwilling to take. Instead, the teacher's contributions were acknowledged discreetly within scientific circles, where his methods were studied and refined away from public view. The KGB's internal humiliation was matched by a determined resolve to prevent further breaches. The agency intensified its efforts to tighten cryptographic protocols, improve key generation processes, and enhance operational security. New layers of secrecy were imposed around code systems, with access restricted to a smaller, more trusted cadre of officers. These measures aimed to restore confidence and reassert control over the agency's vital communications. Yet the legacy of the teacher's revelations persisted. His work had exposed systemic vulnerabilities that could not be undone simply by bureaucratic decree. The incident served as a stark lesson in the dangers of complacency and the necessity of continuous innovation and vigilance. It underscored the reality that no cryptographic system, no matter how sophisticated, was immune to failure, if not rigorously implemented and scrutinized. The psychological aftermath for many KGB officers lingered long after the investigations concluded. The episode became a cautionary tale within the intelligence community, a reminder of the ever-present risk of being outmaneuvered by unexpected adversaries. It instilled a grudging respect for the power of mathematical ingenuity and civilian expertise, even as the agency sought to reassert its dominance. In the corridors of power, the incident also prompted a re-evaluation of the relationship between the state and its scientific talents. The teacher's success highlighted the potential contributions of civilian researchers, challenging the rigid hierarchies that had long separated official intelligence operatives from independent scholars. While the political climate limited open collaboration, the episode planted seeds for a gradual shift toward valuing intellectual innovation within certain controlled parameters. Ultimately, the KGB's encounter with this unexpected adversary revealed the vulnerabilities hidden beneath the surface of Soviet cryptographic pride. The agency's most trusted codes, once symbols of unassailable power, had been compromised by a civilian's mathematical brilliance. The humiliation endured was not merely a professional setback, but a profound challenge to the agency's identity and authority. As the dust settled, the KGB officers who had once dismissed the teacher's work were forced to confront the uncomfortable truth. Their fortress of secrecy had been breached from within, and the battle between code makers and code breakers was far from over. The episode marked a turning point, one that would shape the future of Soviet intelligence and cryptography in ways that reverberated throughout the Cold War era. The revelations of the school teacher's cryptographic breakthrough sparked a wave of urgent reforms within Soviet intelligence circles, transforming the once complacent cryptographic landscape into a battleground of innovation and secrecy. Recognizing the gravity of the breach and the vulnerabilities it exposed, the KGB embarked on a comprehensive overhaul of its code-making practices, determined to fortify its communications against further incursions. Immediate changes swept through the encryption protocols. The generation of keys, once prone to reuse and mechanical limitations, was subjected to rigorous scrutiny and modification. Efforts were made to ensure true randomness in key creation, a principle the teacher's work had highlighted as vital for the cipher's security. Operators were retrained and procedural safeguards were implemented to prevent the operational shortcuts that had previously undermined the system's integrity. This period also saw an intensification of secrecy surrounding cryptographic operations. Access to code systems was restricted to a smaller, more trusted circle within the intelligence apparatus, with tighter controls on information flow and communication channels. The KGB sought to minimize the risk of insider threats and inadvertent leaks by compartmentalizing knowledge and enforcing strict protocols. In doing so, they aimed to restore confidence both internally and externally in the inviolability of Soviet codes. Amid these sweeping reforms, the math teacher's role emerged as an unexpected catalyst for change. Though official acknowledgement of his contributions remained muted, political sensitivities and the desire to avoid public embarrassment kept his name out of state media and formal accolades. His work gained quiet recognition within scientific and intelligence circles. Mathematicians and cryptographers studied his methods, incorporating his insights into new approaches that blended theoretical rigor with practical application. This subtle elevation of the teacher's legacy reflected a broader, if cautious, shift in Soviet attitudes toward innovation and expertise. While the regime continued to emphasize ideological conformity and centralized control, it also began to appreciate the necessity of scientific excellence in safeguarding state security. The teacher's success underscored the importance of rigorous, independent inquiry and mathematical skill in an arena previously dominated by tradition and secrecy. His breakthroughs inspired a generation of Soviet cryptographers to adopt more analytical and inventive approaches. Workshops and research groups emerged, dedicated to exploring the interplay of mathematics, computer science, and cryptography. These efforts led to advancements in encryption algorithms and the development of more sophisticated key generation techniques aimed at eliminating the vulnerabilities the teacher had exposed. The reforms also extended beyond technical adjustments. The KGB's leadership began to cultivate a culture of critical evaluation and continuous improvement, recognizing that complacency and rigid orthodoxy had contributed to their earlier failures. Though the agency remained secretive and hierarchical, it gradually incorporated mechanisms for internal review and feedback, encouraging a more dynamic response to emerging threats. However, the process was neither smooth nor without resistance. Traditionalists within the intelligence community viewed these changes with suspicion, perceiving them as challenges to established authority and expertise. Political sensitivities limited the extent to which the teacher's civilian status could be openly acknowledged or leveraged as a model for collaboration between state security and independent scholars. The balance between innovation and ideological control remained delicate. Nonetheless, the episode's broader influence on Soviet cryptography was undeniable. It marked a turning point, emphasizing that security depended not only on the strength of encryption algorithms, but also on the vigilance and adaptability of those who implemented them. The teacher's work illuminated the critical role of mathematical expertise, fostering a deeper integration of scientific principles into the intelligence apparatus. Beyond the immediate sphere of Soviet intelligence, the teacher's achievements resonated as a rare example of civilian ingenuity, challenging a formidable state security institution during the Cold War. His success defied expectations and hierarchical norms, demonstrating that profound insights could emerge from outside official channels. This narrative subtly undermined the notion of centralized monopoly on expertise that characterized much of Soviet governance. In the years that followed, historical accounts, particularly those emerging after the Soviet Union's dissolution, began to recognize the teacher's pivotal role in exposing fundamental flaws in early cryptographic methods. His story became a touchstone for discussions about the intersection of science, security, and state power, illustrating the complex dynamics that shaped Soviet intelligence during a critical period. The teacher's journey from provincial classroom to cryptographic pioneer highlighted the timeless tension between code makers and code breakers. It underscored how mathematical brilliance, coupled with persistence and creativity, could challenge even the most entrenched and secretive institutions. His work served as a reminder that the battle over secrecy and knowledge is never static, but continually reshaped by those willing to question assumptions and explore new frontiers. Within the Soviet Union, the legacy of this episode influenced not only cryptographic practices, but also the broader culture of scientific inquiry. It encouraged a cautious yet meaningful embrace of intellectual rigor and innovation, even within a system often resistant to change. The teacher's contributions became a silent testament to the power of individual insight amidst the machinery of state security. While the KGB continued to guard its secrets with renewed vigilance, the lessons learned from this breach informed strategies and policies for decades to come. The agency understood that the security of its communications depended as much on human factors, discipline, expertise, openness to critique, as on the robustness of its cryptographic algorithms. This awareness shaped the evolution of Soviet and later Russian cryptographic doctrine. Thus, the unexpected emergence of a provincial math teacher as a figure capable of undermining Soviet cryptographic invulnerability not only humbled the intelligence services, but also propelled them toward a future where mathematical innovation and rigorous code security became paramount. His quiet revolution within the world of ciphers and codes left an indelible mark on the history of Cold War espionage, illustrating that even the most secretive and powerful institutions are vulnerable to the insights of a determined and brilliant mind. In the decades that followed, the episode of the provincial math teacher breaking the KGB's seemingly unbreakable codes assumed a place of quiet significance in the annals of Cold War history, a rare and compelling example of civilian ingenuity challenging the monolithic power of a state security apparatus. This story, once confined to classified archives and whispered conversations within intelligence circles, gradually emerged in post-Soviet accounts as a testament to the enduring tension between code makers and code breakers. The teacher's role was recognized not as a mere footnote, but as a pivotal moment that exposed the fundamental flaws in early Soviet cryptographic methods. His work underscored the distinction between theoretical security and practical implementation, a difference that had profound implications for the security of state secrets. Historians and cryptographers alike came to view his achievements as a critical turning point, one that highlighted the vulnerabilities inherent in even the most sophisticated systems when human error and institutional complacency intervened. This recognition was not without its complexities. The Soviet legacy of secrecy and control had long suppressed narratives that might portray the state in a vulnerable light. Yet, in the broader post-Soviet discourse, the teacher's story became a symbol of intellectual resilience and the power of individual insight. It challenged the dominant narratives of centralized infallibility and illustrated how knowledge and innovation could emerge from unexpected quarters. The historical reflection on this episode also illuminated the perennial nature of the battle between encryption and decryption. The teacher's success was a vivid example of how mathematical brilliance and early decoding innovations could humble even the most confident and secretive intelligence agencies. His achievements reminded observers that cryptography is a dynamic field, perpetually shaped by advances in mathematics, technology, and human ingenuity. Moreover, the episode highlighted the broader societal and institutional dynamics at play during the Cold War. It revealed the tensions between rigid ideological control and the necessity of scientific inquiry, between centralized authority and individual creativity. These tensions, embodied in the contrast between the KGB's initial arrogance and the teacher's quiet determination, offered insights into the complexities of Soviet governance and its approach to security and innovation. The legacy of the teacher's work extended beyond the technical realm. It became a narrative about the power of perseverance, curiosity, and intellectual rigor in the face of formidable obstacles. His story served as an inspiration to subsequent generations of mathematicians, cryptographers, and scholars who navigated the delicate balance between state secrecy and scientific advancement. In the broader context of Cold War espionage, this episode stood out as a rare instance where a civilian's mathematical skill directly challenged and disrupted the operations of a major intelligence agency. It underscored that the struggle over information was not solely a contest of armies and spies, but also a battle of ideas and innovation. The teacher's breakthroughs demonstrated that the greatest vulnerabilities often lie not in technology alone, but in the assumptions and practices of those who wield it. This enduring lesson resonates in contemporary discussions about cybersecurity and cryptography, where the interplay between human factors and technical design continues to define the security landscape. The teacher's story reminds us that vigilance, creativity, and a willingness to question established norms remain essential in safeguarding information in any era. Ultimately, the transformation wrought by this episode was profound. The KGB's experience with the teacher's decoding innovations compelled a re-evaluation of Soviet cryptographic doctrine and contributed to shaping the future of intelligence practices in Russia and beyond. It highlighted the necessity of integrating mathematical expertise into security operations and fostered a culture that, while still secretive, increasingly valued rigorous analysis and innovation. The tale of the provincial math teacher who humbled the KGB stands as a compelling chapter in the history of cryptography and Cold War espionage. It exemplifies how a single individual, armed with intellect and perseverance, can challenge entrenched power structures and alter the course of security practice. This story remains a powerful reminder of the timeless and ongoing battle between those who seek to conceal information and those who strive to uncover it, a battle that continues to shape the contours of global intelligence today.